We will be breaking down the war on lumber that has taken place between Canada and the United States. Mainly the misinformation that is being spread out there. That's what we're going to address today. Give me the thumbs up if you are getting the audio. Is the audio coming through okay? We've had issues with the live streams not having good audio. So I just want to make sure that everybody can hear everything all right and that it's coming through clearly before we get too started here into this. Where are all the messages? Why am I not getting any? Hold on, let me get live chat. There we go. All right, audio's good. Thank you, all-nighter. Let's get started. Okay, this is an article coming out of the U.S. Lumber Coalition. There should be a link down in the description for you guys. It's titled, Canada and Home Builders Misleading Claims That the United States Needs Unfairly Traded Softwood Lumber Imports Have Run Their Course. Now, this is something that I've been trying to share on this channel pretty much since I started, and that is the lumber industry is not what it seems to be as far as the mainstream media narrative of what it is describing the situation that has taken place. Like, lumber is not anywhere near the story that is being told. What is happening here is very misleading when it comes to the home builders and the mainstream media and just the misinformation that is being pushed. I have been asked so many times, what is the tariff going to do to the lumber prices? And I said it over and over again. This is not new. This is something that has been going on for quite some time. And to believe that any effort that is taking place right now to drive lumber prices up is very wrong. All the mainstream media narrative has gotten this incredibly wrong. Let me start breaking this thing down for you. Again, there's a link down in the description for you. It starts off saying this: softwood lumber prices remain at historically low levels. That's right, historically low levels, much like I have been trying to share. Prices today are 54% lower than they were in 1975 average and 49% lower than their 1995 average adjusted for inflation. There's no inflation in lumber. That's where I keep trying to say these prices are incredibly low. I'm selling 2x4s right now for $3.85 for a 2x4 8 standard and better. That same thing was priced at $13.50 at the peak, and back in 2018, I was selling them for $4.20. Today, they are cheaper than any time that I have been selling it, except for very brief moments when the lumber prices crashed. Goes on to say this: yet Canada and the National Association of Home Builders, the NAHB, spared no efforts in 2025 to spread the misinformation about the impact of President Trump's U.S. trade law enforcement on lumber prices and the cost of lumber in new construction. Bam, just like I was saying. All these people were screaming, oh man, tariffs are going to drive lumber prices up to the moon. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? That is delusional. That is not accurate. Right? And here it is, it's proven the case. Time goes on and tells the truth. The truth is, it was very inaccurate, misleading information that people were spreading out there about the tariffs. Goes on to say this: the Canadian government and the NAHB throughout 2025 claimed that increased tariffs and duties on Canadian lumber imports responding to unfair trade practices increased the cost of for U.S. consumers and contributed to the housing affordability crisis in the United States. Boom. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. I tried to share that again. Nobody wanted to hear it. They wanted to talk about how it was that it was forcing the problems that we are experiencing with the housing crisis. And I kept trying to say it over and over again. It's not the lumber. Lumber is something you have to focus in on. It is the key component, but it is not the problem. It is the symptom. I keep sharing that. I keep saying, gotta focus in on lumber. When the demand for lumber increases and you don't have a lot out there, the price of it is going to explode. That is a sign. That is an indicator of the economy. Very important stuff. All right, goes on to say this. Canada claimed, this is crazy, but this is true. We just actually reported on this yesterday. Canada claimed it would walk away from the U.S. market instead of exporting lumber to other markets. And instead it would export lumber to other markets. There we go. And they claim that the U.S. lumber industry does not have enough capacity to replace Canadian lumber when it leaves our market. Now, I find that to be almost, right? Almost true. It's not exactly true, but it's almost true in the sense that when the demand picks up and there's not a lot of inventory out there, the prices are going to explode. But what happens after that? Production, right? People want to take advantage of the high prices, and then they start coming in and producing ever increasing amounts of more lumber in order to take advantage of the higher prices. That will be the result of it. At the initial time, yeah, we could use that Canadian lumber to keep the prices from increasing. But can we produce all our own lumber ourselves? You bet we can. And this is the reality of the situation. See, the Canadian lumber industry maintains a massive level of excess production capacity and ships 60 to 70% of its total production into the United States, flooding the U.S. market and suppressing lumber prices below normal market rates as it desperately seeks to hold on to artificially high U.S. market share. Now, that right there should be telling. Right? Here it is, lumber being produced in Canada, way more than they need, like excess of 60 to 70% more than what they need. What do you think is going to happen to the lumber prices if all that excess lumber comes into the United States, especially if it's being subsidized? So here you got a bunch of cheap lumber that pours into the United States, and the United States doesn't have subsidized lumber. They got lumber mills that are trying to compete for market share. So now how is it that the United States is able to produce enough lumber for itself when you have cheap lumber coming in from Canada that then denies the profitability of the mills here in the United States to take place when you have that cheap lumber coming in? This is the point. This is how the tariffs are essentially working for lumber production here in the United States. See, bringing manufacturing back to the United States isn't going to take something of like a natural ability to have a competitive stance. You can't compete against that. There's no way. And so without the tariffs and the ever increasing amounts of threats of them, then the domestic supply just would not be competitive against that cheap Canadian lumber, whether it's subsidized or not. You see what I'm getting at? This is where the problem really lies. The moment that you remove the tariffs, the moment government gets out of the way, boom, there goes your job. All right. Now, if you make it to the point that there is no other supplier out there because Canada has literally started changing the size of that lumber, so it just doesn't even come in, like there's no product to even sell to the United States, where is it the United States is going to get it from anywhere else? They're not. See, they're force feeding this event. I read something, or maybe heard it, that now United States, not that they are, but now the United States has the ability or could essentially buy lumber cheaper from Russia than it could from Canada now with the tariffs. This is something that I was like, man, that isn't great. There's a lot of timber industry up in the Russian-Ukraine area. All right, going on to say this. Canadian softwood lumber imports are subject to anti-dumping and anti-subsidies or countervailing duties because of Canada's persistent abuse of the U.S. market through massive government subsidies to the Canadian lumber producers and pervasive and harmful dumping practices by those producers. All right, goes on. The current anti-dumping and countervailing duties reflect the fact that Canadian lumber companies shipped large quantities of softwood lumber to the United States even as the demand for softwood lumber was weakening. See, this was a major problem. This is something that we experienced in 2019. And they ended up shutting down a lot of their production on account of it. The unrelenting supply of Canadian lumber in the face of that declining demand, further drove down prices, leading to a large loss at both the U.S. and Canadian firms. Now, this was 2019. I'm sure this is when he was describing it. We were reporting on massive amounts of mill curtailments and shutdowns that were happening during that time. And this is exactly the reason why. They had dumped so much cheap lumber into the United States that the demand for it crashed and all these mills started shutting down. Had Canada firms, and this is his opinion, right? Had Canadian firms responded to market realities responsibly, their current anti-dumping and countervailing duty margins would be much lower. Instead, Canada can only express dismay that they are facing consequences of their own behavior. All right. let's see, the increase in U.S. home prices is unrelated to the price of softwood lumber. Now, this is a pretty interesting one to think about. Now, I asked a few people just blindly, they didn't know anything about this article or what I was talking about. I just asked them, I'm like, how much of the total cost of a house? I mean, I'm talking land, permits, labor, everything that goes into it. How much of this entire house was the lumber portion of it? Right? And I had a few people tell me 10 to 15%, right? That's where they thought it was at. According to this, it's even less, like almost an insignificant amount. And really, when I heard about how it costs $60,000 to run the water supply to a job site, I'm thinking, man, if that's the case, like adding $60,000 to a total bill, the lumber portion of that must have been pretty small on that overall project. But this is what it says. Right? Lumber accounts for a very small share of the sales and the price of the newly constructed home, typically 1 to 2%. And regardless, lumber prices are currently low by historic standards, and they have not kept pace with inflation. The cost of lumber makes up less than 2% of the total cost of a new home, and hence has never and never will be a factor in the housing affordability. One must look elsewhere for a solution to new home prices. Land, labor, regulatory restrictions, and the free market reality of home building demand has boosted many home building input prices. And again, this is something that I had tried to share, right? It's not the price of the lumber, it's the availability of it. That is the problem we face. Time is money. If you don't have the available lumber to put the project together, nothing else takes place. There is nothing that can happen without the lumber. The lumber is the structure. Everything else gets attached to it. So there is no electrician, there's no plumber, there's no siding, there's nothing that can happen without the lumber first. It is the key component to the entire thing. And although it is a very small portion of the entire price of the whole project, it is a key component, the key component. And if the availability is not there, time is money. Right? These are very important factors that must be internalized. The availability of lumber is not necessarily something that you can just turn a faucet on and produce it. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. It goes on to say here, the U.S. lumber industry and workers sent a letter to the President Trump on the need for continued strong enforcement of the U.S. trade laws to keep expanding U.S. lumber manufacturing and availability to build more American homes with American lumber. And again, they are begging for government interference. Right? Like, this is how you have to look at it objectively. Right? You have to look at this objectively. They are begging and pleading the government to continue to interfere with the tariffs and ideas of preventing the cheap subsidized lumber from coming into the United States. Without that effort, we would lose that capacity. You see, this is government intervention taking place. This isn't free market forces happening here. And I get it that the government of Canada is interfering too. But it's just going to show that they are literally forcing a situation to take place that has higher cost product so that our manufacturing can stay here. What happens when government gets out of the way? All right? You see the problem we face? Okay. Okay, enforcing U.S. trade laws helps increase the U.S. supply of lumber to build American homes, and all without impacting the cost of new homes, as demonstrated by the data. So essentially, they're saying by doing this, it's not going to cost the price of homes to go up. I disagree. Availability of lumber being limited then puts a time constraint on it, which is money. So that's not true, right? That's simply not true. All right, it goes on to say this. The U.S. Lumber Coalition is an alliance of large and small softwood lumber producers from around the country, joined by their employees and woodland owners working to address Canada's unfair labor trade practices. Our goal is to serve as a voice of the American lumber community and effectively address Canada's unfair softwood lumber trade practices. The coalition supports the full enforcement of the U.S. trade laws to allow the U.S. industry to invest and grow to its natural size without being impaired by unfairly trade imports. Continued full enforcement of the U.S. trade laws will strengthen domestic supply lines by maximizing long-term domestic production and lumber availability produced by the U.S. workers to build U.S. homes For more information, contact the coalition's website. So very interesting stuff when you think about what it is that they have shared for their information here. I also find it pretty interesting. I'm not sure. Does it go in here to talk about? Yeah. The capacity, right? The U.S. production capacity has increased by 8 billion board feet since 2016, when the current anti-dumping and countervailing duties cases began, to 2016, right? With U.S. producers supplying over 36 billion additional board feet of American-made lumber to build American homes. The true aim of the U.S. trade remedy measures and the Section of 232 tariff is to enable the U.S. lumber industry to grow to its potential without market dumping surges of imported lumber. 8 years of enforcing anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws have already demonstrated that the U.S. producers are prepared to capitalize on the opportunity, right? So like if you reduce the availability, that increases the demand then increases the prices, and now they want to take full advantage of this, right? This is how they want to do it. U.S. annual softwood lumber capacity increased by approximately 8 billion board feet from 2015 to July of 2025. The Section 232 tariffs implemented by President Trump also have the potential, see, here's the key, the potential to accelerate U.S. capacity expansions by creating additional pressure on Canada to reduce its excess capacity. Right? So we're going to push more product from the United States by reducing the availability of Canadian lumber. Another decade of growth at this rate would enable the U.S. industry to achieve capacity levels sufficient to meet U.S. consumption needs in a typical year. So over the course of 10 years is what it would take in order for the U.S. to completely become self-sufficient on their lumber demand. So over the course of the 10 years, what's going to be happening with lumber prices? Most likely, they're not going to be able, the supply will not be able to meet the demand. I mean, that's essentially what he's saying right there. Over the next 10 years, it's going to take for the industry to be able to reach the capacity, right? Achieve a capacity level sufficient to meet the U.S. consumption. See what's really going down here, guys? I don't know how many other people see this, right? How many other people are looking at it for the reality of the situation we now face? So many people out there talk about the issues that we face within the Canadian lumber industry, and I'm talking, what issues is it that you're asking about? Are you talking about the cheap lumber that came into the United States? Or are you talking about the issues of denying the supply so that we can bring more power back to our local mills here to produce a lumber that is going to be expensive over the next 10 years? Which one is the problem? Right? I don't know how many other people are going to internalize this information for what it really is. How many people are going to deny it? How many people are going to subject themselves to manipulation tactics in order to achieve a profitable position for the rich elitist out there? That's what most people are going to end up taking this information and running with it like. You know? It's not easy to step away from it and look at it in a distant side view, like looking at it from the hill, looking down on the economy of it, and just try to observe what it is that's actually happening. You know, when you think about what it is that is needed in order to build more houses, lumber is a key component. Many times people will say, yeah, but that's not going to drive the prices around and stuff. That's not the point. Lumber and the price of a home and the availability of it and how it is that that home gets constructed over a particular timeline is very important to the cost. The availability of lumber is not just something that is just like you can snap your fingers and make it happen. It is a very difficult item. It's heavy in every single way. From the time you fall the tree to the time you haul it to the mill to the time you put it on a truck and send it to the retail yard to the time you put it in the back of somebody's truck to the time it gets to be placed inside of a wall. Every single bit of it is heavy. It's cumbersome. And there's very little margin. There's almost no profit in lumber at all. Not for a lumber yard, not for the mills, not for anybody. And yet here it is, the key component to building. You have to recognize it for what it really is. If you don't have the lumber available, that's time. Time is money. And although the price of the lumber going into the project itself can double or triple and not really make a big difference on the bottom line of the overall cost of the house, if it's unavailable, then that makes it the most valuable thing in the entire world. All right. All right, the younger generations buy no houses and use no trade services. $3,000 for transmissions for a junkyard is a hard thing to sell. I finally hear some good news and you want to come in with the where do you think we're going to be in 10 years, and I think we're going to be dead. But that doesn't mean I can't be happy now. Well, deplorable, you must be really old, man. I'm not going to be dead in 10 years. All right, cruising back up. All right, a good mechanic knows how to check junkyards for the parts he needs. Want to see how they treat the workers? Read about the 1933 milk strike. Wow. All right. Like trying to pay rent with loaves of bread. Right? Crazy times. Let me cruise up here a little ways. Years ago, it was $25,000 for city water hookup in my area. In order to build here, you have to have a hydrant nearby or spend $15K to put a tank and one on your property. Crazy. Lumber is a dead industry. New home builds will not be needed for a long time. Lower population mixed with boomers giving away their homes. Yeah, I'm gonna doubt that. Not old, just diseased? Oh, man. Dude, that's terrible. Too much funny money in the system. High prices are needed to drain out all the extra liquidity. Very true. The solution to high prices is high prices. I second that. I don't know where the high prices in lumber is. I don't know where people saw that. I don't know where people get that. I don't know where people say that there's an issue with Canadian lumber and all the other stuff that goes along. Like, all that stuff is manufactured. I don't know. I don't know what the point of it all is, right? Maybe to give an excuse on why prices of homes are high because they can't really think of anything else. You know, I mean, most people who understand and look at the Cantillon effect do not question why property prices are as high as they are. They don't. They just literally don't question it. They know exactly why they're as high as they are because there's no better evidence of the abundance of money in a system than to look at property. That's it. When people have concentrated their wealth, they buy property. There's a concentration of property into the wealthy. When you have such an exorbitant amount of wealth and inequality that has taken place, then you have a bunch of people who don't have property, and then they look at the people who do have property and they say, okay, well, at someday you're going to have to relinquish all that stuff because you can't concentrate that much of it. I very much disagree. I very much do. If you continue to pour new money into the system, that's exactly what is going to happen, is a concentration of property into the hands of a few. All right? There's no better evidence of it than property ownership. And unless you think that there's going to be some sort of reduction in the new money supply that's coming in, like any kind of serious reduction in it, then there's no other direction in which that it will go except for more concentration of wealth into the hands of a few, which will be then evident inside of the property ownership. I can say it a million times over and over again. I can try and describe it differently, but that will be the results of ever increasing amounts of new money. I don't care what laws or ideas or anything else that comes up. There's really nothing else that will happen because that's how the underlying economic forces work. So, no, it's not. There's going to be more concentration of property ownership into the hands of a few. Everybody else is going to rent that property. And then you're going to find that the rents of those properties are going to be incredibly high. And the only thing that would stop that from happening is the prevention of new money from coming into the system. That will not take place. There will be ever increasing amounts of new money. No doubt about it. Otherwise, everybody falls into pain and misery. So, I mean, unless, I guess there's the expectation of pain and misery for everybody, which is fine. I mean, I think I could actually do quite well in that situation myself, because at least I'm aware of it and how that would look. But the majority of the people are going to be crying their eyes out, and they're going to be wondering what it is that they need to do. And that is not a situation that I think anybody is looking forward to. I know I'm not. Right? I know I'm not looking forward to that situation. If it did take place, I think I would be quite successful in it. Right? But the reality of the situation is most people have no idea what it would be like if the new money turned off. And if the new money turned off, there would be pain and suffering and misery for a lot of people out there. And I just don't see that being the direction in which we're going to go. There's not a politician who's going to do it. There's nobody who's going to vote for politicians to do it. There's no banker who's going to suggest it. There's nothing out there that's going to give you the ability to then even have that as a future possibility. There's nothing out there. It's only ever increasing amounts of new money. Separation between the rich and the poor, inequality, property ownership concentration, until the entire system collapses into pain and misery. Which one do you want? All right, those are the two directions. That's it. There is already a lot of pain and suffering. You ain't seen nothing yet, dude. The question is, will their investments actually work and save you after the dollar collapses? This is not even close. What you have right now is a holiday in the Bahamas comparatively to what the pain and suffering is really going to be like. You just want a little tiny little glimpse of what the pain and suffering is going to look like? Go and do a little tiny research on the crawlers of London. Right, we did a little bit of description of this in, I think, yesterday's video. The crawlers of London. I was doing some reading up on this particular time in the economy in London, where industries were really taking off and the concentration or the inequality was really starting to happen as the flow was going through. They had no social safety nets. There was nothing for anybody to do for the people out there other than just the charitable contributions of literally handing it to the people on the streets, because they had nothing for them. There was no social security, there was no EBT, there was none of that stuff, right? And so here's this story of these crawlers of London who had nothing. Like, they didn't have the savings, they don't have the social safety nets, they don't have family, they don't have a job. They're so weak and old and tired and sickly that they can't even walk down the streets, and they are crawling. That's where they got the name. Dragging themselves down the street because they cannot get themselves with enough energy to stand up and walk. These crawlers there was a story of a lady who would give her baby, this little baby, to one of these crawlers so she could go to work for 8 hours. The crawler would sit there and hold the baby, essentially just so it wouldn't be laying on the ground, right? And for that, she was paid a weak cup of tea, like a cup of tea that was made with used leaves and a piece of bread. And that's what was her payment for 8 hours of taking care of this baby and keeping it from dying. You want to talk about pain and misery, man? We don't even experience stuff like pain and misery. What we have is a holiday. We have one of the greatest moments in our time for not producing anything and having all the abundance of the world that's being sent to us and shoved into our face, comparatively to what a crawler was experiencing. Pain and misery, you ain't seen nothing yet. All right. How will your investment secure a cup of tea and some toast in the future? All right. That's a good way of looking at it. That's actually a really good way of looking at it. How will your investment secure you a weak cup of tea and a piece of toast into the future? Because if you're depending on that yield off of that government debt, man. I mean, Greenspan already said you're going to get the payment, no doubt. You will get that payment. Like, your promised a payment from the U.S. government and fiat currency, guaranteed. 0 chance of default. The problem you'll face, you may not be able to get any kind of real goods and services with it. Why? Because we don't produce real goods and services here in the United States. So what happens when the money comes in and it doesn't buy real goods and services? What's the point? It doesn't do anything. Right? That's going to be pain and misery. We're headed down that road. Right? I mean, there's no other direction that we're headed. That's the direction. How far out are we? How long does it take? At what moment does it finally cave in on itself? Anybody want to guess? Well, $1 million question right there. You know the answer to it, you're a millionaire. Or even multi-millionaires. All right, take them down before the buyers decide the price. It makes sense with Trump talking about not wanting home prices to come down. What better way than to take out the linchpin of housing? Absolutely. Boom. Man, if you don't have the lumber, how do you build the homes? I don't care what the price is. The price could be 3, 4, 5 times more than it is now. It doesn't necessarily increase the price of the home. It may a little bit, right? Even especially if you got 4 or 5 times higher. But doubling the price of lumber right now would not drive the price of homes up, the cost of building a new home up. I mean, it would a little bit, but not much. Tiny little bit. Very, very insignificantly. In fact, you could probably adjust the cabinets and flooring that you put into the place and make up for the entire increase in lumber, right? Double it. Lumber is not the price of lumber is not the issue. It's the availability of it. That's it. If it's not available, right, there ain't nothing happening. Nothing else can happen. There's literally nothing else that exists without the lumber being constructed first. There's no place for the electrician. There's no place for the plumber. There's no place for their siding or windows or any other of the amenities. There's no place for it to be without the lumber being constructed first. There. The dollar will get far stronger before any of this happens. I totally agree, Brody. I totally agree. And see, this is where, like, a lot of people love the idea of the dollar failure idea. They're like, oh, man, finally I get my chance. Everybody's going to be equal. And I'm thinking, man, that is not even the case. And the problem that we end up facing along the way is that the dollar will get incredibly strong before it fails. And I know that is a hard thing for people to internalize, but it has to do with the amount of dollar-denominated debt that exists outside of this country. When that dollar-denominated debt comes due, there is not enough dollars to pay that debt. The demand for dollars will skyrocket. The amount of dollar-denominated debt that is doing dollar transactions outside of the United States is overwhelming. Nobody even really knows how much is actually happening. This is crazy to think. You write a contract says, I owe you US dollars, 100 US dollars. With that contract, you start using it like currency. They are literally creating currency with their own pen, right? That is now acting like US dollars. Think about how much US dollars exist out there in the world when you have people who are creating contracts and then using those contracts like currency. And the demand for dollars is much higher than anybody ever gave it any kind of appreciation for. And when that day comes, and that debt has come due, and the world decides that they are going to switch to a new currency, which isn't anywhere close to right now, even though many people want to believe it, it's not. Right? The day that that comes, and that switch does happen, it's going to be a very devastating event for the United States. As that money comes back to the United States, there is nothing here for the United States to produce for our citizens. We just don't do enough of it. We produce a lot of stuff here, but we do not produce as much as we buy, right? We import more than we export. And the only way to deal with that is to lower the standard of living dramatically. That is going to be a very devastating event for most people. All right. It's sunny down here in Florida. A fresh shave and a haircut are not luxuries for a salesman. No, it's actually a necessity. It's a necessity. If you want to be a good salesman, then you really have to be clean shaven. Not saying that you can't do sales with a beard, right? Like, absolutely, right? There's plenty of salesmen out there who have facial hair. Not a problem, right? Not a problem. Here's the thing. I've done it, tested it. I will tell you right now, it is a million times easier to get the sale done when you are clean shaven. I don't know why, right? But subconscious, there's a lot of people out there who think you have something to hide if you have facial hair. If you remove it, even if they like it, even if you look ugly without it, they will find you more trustworthy by not having it. And that's not everybody. It's a subconscious thing from some people. However, your sales, if you are a salesman, will increase dramatically if you just remove the facial hair. Not me, right? Like, that's not me. That's the customer. My buddy bought a portable saw and mill and built a house out of trees from his land. It was neat watching the whole process and helping from time to time. Yeah, and the thing about like buying a mill and producing your own lumber, if that is a permitted house, like if it's unpermitted, you're out in the woods and whatever, okay, then nobody cares. But if it's a permitted house, like something that you are going to try and build and sell, then that lumber has to be graded. So even though you've milled it up yourself, it still has to go through a grading process in order to be used for construction purposes and like to build a residential home to sell. Yeah. So there's still like, a bit of a process that goes with it. This is the most I've trusted what Simon says in a long time. Why? What would I have said in the past that you wouldn't been able to trust? I leave links down in the description for everything. Like, in fact, I kind of gear this channel in such a way that you don't have to trust me. Right? I try to share the information, my opinion about it, leave a link, and for you to do your own research with. That doesn't, like, for me, that kind of alleviates your trust for me, right? Like, it's just my opinion that, that I'm trying to share here, and then bring you some information so that you can do the research with it. All right, what time is it? All righty, guys, I got a few more minutes here, and then I got to call quits. 152 people watching. Keep hitting that like button. Someone horny in the background. All right. Yeah, he was in the middle of nowhere, so no permits. Yeah, and that's the way. That's the best way, right? That's the best way. Nobody needs to know what we're doing up here. Hey, gang, just jumping in here. More likes, please. Thank you, Standard Nursery. Really appreciate it. All right. Speaking of calls, calling 7 on the dice. He's just teasing because you're clean shaven today, i.e. more trustworthy. Oh, I get it, right? Because we were talking about the trustworthiness. I get it. But no, I think that's true. I think that's actually true about anybody out there, no matter who it is, whether it's, the Uneducated Economist or George Gammon or some news article that you're reading out there. Everything should be taken for the opinion, and then check the resources. Like, I mean, almost always, like not always, but almost always, I will have a link down in the description for where it is that I got my opinion or my information or something that I'm trying to share. That way you can take it in and look at it for yourself and say, nah, I disagree with you, or no, I totally agree with that, or no, that's an interesting point, I'm going to have to internalize that for later. That's what I'm trying to do here, right? Is to share the information in such a way that then you can use that information for your own direction, for your own, because every one of us is living a different life, and like nobody's doing the same thing, right? And so I think that's important to understand it in that way. It's like, this is the information, that's his opinion, this is my opinion on it. We may share some of that same opinion, or we may disagree with it. Point being is that we have internalized the information and then talking about it as far as the opinion about it goes. Right? That's where it goes. Like somebody says, oh man, the Uneducated Economist has, the opinion of all opinions. It would be like, how can you possibly say that? It's just like, you got to think about the research and the understanding of the information that has been processed to understand what it is that I am trying to deliver out there. And so having an opinion on it, I mean, that's cool. It's like really having an opinion about how entertaining the information might be, right? But really the information comes from your own research, from those links that I try to leave, right? That's where the reality is down there. What I share is just an opinion. All right, you guys are awesome. Uneducated Economist, you let me know.